Hi there, I'm Patsy Thompson, and in this tutorial we're going to learn how to create elegant feather border designs for your quilt. Now I'm sure you've seen all kinds of beautiful feather border designs, but you may not have taken note of the differences between them that set them apart from one another. If you look closely, you'll see that there are all kinds of wonderful options as far as feather border designs go. Now, some feather borders are never-ending because the end of the feather literally merges with the beginning of the feather when they meet up. Other times, the border is created by having a series of feathers interact with one another in various ways. Sometimes, a feather border design also includes other types of design elements, and these may occur in the center of the border or at the corners of the border. The world of feather borders is an exciting one, and today I'm going to show you how to create a border that looks very fancy, but is actually the easiest feather border to create. Today we'll be discussing a centered feather border. In this particular border, each feather begins at the center of the border and ends at the center of the corner. I call the place where the feather begins the takeoff zone, and the place in the corner where two feathers kiss is what I call the kissing zone. As we go through this, you'll see that these two areas are very important. Now let's meet at the marking table and you'll see just how easy it is to create this border. We'll be stitching our feather inside this lighter purple border zone, so we will use that color to define the boundaries of the design that we'll actually stitch out later on. Now we'll begin by marking the center of each side of the border with a temporary marker. I'm using a soap sliver for this. Notice that as I work, I place my ruler so that I mark my mark at a right angle to the edge of the border. Once all four sides are finished, you'll then go and mark the miter line of each of the four corners, and in marking these 8 marks, we will have just defined all 4 takeoff zones and all 4 kissing zones. Think of these as the Berlin Wall of quilting. They cannot be crossed without severe repercussions. Now, if we were working on an outside edge border, like the dark purple you see here, we would next mark a temporary line 1/4 to 1/2 inch from the edge, as this would remind us to stay out of that area, because if we stitch there, our plumes would end up covered by the binding if we quilted beyond that marked line. Because we're working in an interior border, life is easy, and we just need to remember to stay within that fabric border zone and avoid crossing the takeoff lines or the kissing lines. Now the magic of feather borders is really created with a flexible curve ruler. These rulers come in a variety of lengths, and their claim to fame is that they can be easily bent into any shape you wish to create a pleasing curve. They also have markings on both sides, one side in inches and the other in centimeters, and this makes it easy to place them exactly where you wish if you are tracing the same curve repeatedly. For border work, it's easiest to use the longest ruler you can find, so I'll be using my 40-inch long ruler. We're going to be creating and then marking the curve that will be the feather spine guideline. We begin by bending the ruler into some pleasing curves that will keep our feather within the border and also allow us enough space to stitch plumes on either side of it. Now this will take a little time on your part, and you can easily revise a curve by simply unbending and then rebending the ruler. Once you have a curve that you like, trace alongside it with a temporary marker, like a soap sliver or a soap pencil or a chalk pencil. Before you pick that ruler up, make a mental note of the number at the beginning and ending of your curve, because these numbers will help you position this similarly on all 4 sides of the border. Gently lift the ruler and repeat this process on the adjoining border. If you accidentally bend the ruler, just lay it up against the first curve and then rebend it into that shape. Mark this curve on all 4 sides of the border. Once done, Gently flip the ruler over and trace its curve against the first curve you marked, and then repeat this for all 4 sides. What we're doing here is creating mirror image spine guidelines. Once you're done, you will see that these marked curves create a lovely frame for your quilt, and the exciting part is just beginning. The key to any center border design is creating these mirror image guidelines. The feathers themselves will not be mirror images of one another. That would be way too stressful to stitch. Now let's go meet at the sewing machine and you'll see how to stitch these out. I begin just to the side of the takeoff line, and as I stitch out my plumes, I'm taking care not to cross that line. I'm allowed to come up next to it, but I may not cross it. Now what I'm stitching here is the basic freeform feather, and as you can see, there is no actual stitch spine in this feather. Instead, I'm creating the illusion of a spine by repeatedly bringing my stitching line back to that marked spine guideline. It's the confluence of stitches repeatedly returning to that marked guideline that makes the viewer think there's a spine when really there is not. What's important for you to know, though, is everything I'm teaching you about centered feather border designs applies here, whether you are stitching freeform feathers, feathers with a stitch spine, bump back feathers, or feathers with highly decorated spines. The rules for this kind of border work are all the same regardless of what kind of feather you're making. Now we're now approaching the marked kissing line, so I need to pay close attention to what I'm doing. I stitch out the end of my feather very deliberately, taking care to approach that kissing line, but not to cross it. You'll notice that some of these stitching scenes are sped up, and that's just to save time on this video, but also enable you to see what I'm stitching. I don't really stitch this fast. Now there are 2 places in this type of border where all the action occurs, the takeoff zone and the kissing zone. These are the focal points that will draw the viewer's eye in when the viewer is up fairly close to the quilt. So these are the places where you want to put forth a little bit of effort to create the illusion that you're stitching mirror image feathers even though you're not. So let's now see how to handle the takeoff zone. I begin stitching on the opposite side of the takeoff line, and I'm very aware of the plumes at the base of the last feather because I'm basically trying to kind of mimic them. Again, I can come close to that takeoff line, but I don't want to cross it, and you can see now that there's some visual interaction between these 2 feathers. Once I'm outside of that takeoff zone, I really don't need to worry about mimicking anything. My goal is to just keep respecting that marked spine guideline. Now because this is just my second feather, I don't need to try to mirror another feather when I approach the kissing zone, so I just work to make sure I approach the kissing line but do not cross it. Once done, I tie off my thread line so I can begin my next feather. Once I move to my next side, I am again beginning a new feather, and I take extra care not to cross the takeoff line. I work just as I have before, adding plume after plume along the spine guideline to build my feather. As I near the end of my feather, though, I can see there's already another feather that's in that kissing zone area, so now I really do need to pay attention. If you need to stop stitching to examine that last feather, it's fine to stop. Once you've got a sense of the ending of the last feather, stitch your final plumes on this feather very deliberately so they kind of mirror those of the other feather. Again, it's fine to come close to that kissing line, but don't cross it. Once done, pat yourself on the back as you have just learned the basics of creating mirror image feathers. You'll now work your way through this remaining side and then on to the next side, following all the same principles we've just talked about. Once done, you'll see that the curves of your feathers have created an elegant frame around your quilt, and because we never had to actually merge our feathers in any way, this was really a very easy frame to create. Now, let's say you wanted to do something to kind of dress this feather up, just make it a little bit more eye-catching. Maybe even accentuate those voluptuous curves of all those feather plumes. Well, that's where hyperquilting can come into play. Hyperquilting is a fun technique where you stitch a design in one thread color, then switch to a high contrast decorative thread and stitch some kind of secondary design right inside of that first quilted design. Feathers make wonderful substrates for hyperquilting because you can fill plumes with all kinds of interesting designs. Hyperquilting can literally transform a quilted motif, and you control how much you'd like to transform it and how you'd like to transform it by the motif you quilt inside and the choice of thread that you use. You hold all the creative control in your own hands. Now, when I'm working on a quilt like this, I really do want to dress it up a bit because the center block is really heavily decorated with thread. The easiest hyperquilting you can do is what I call inlining. This means stitching an internal motif inside each of the plumes that is really the same shape as the plume but just stitched on a smaller scale. It's fairly easy to do, and I begin stitching at the base of the feather and move all the way to the tip of the feather. Once done, this has the effect of adding some detail to the motif, and it also really accentuates the curve of the feather as well. It's kind of like highlighting that spine line. So there you have it, the centered feather border and some basic principles on the technique of hyperquilting. Now know that this is really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to feather border designs, so take some time to really experiment with feather border designs and you'll see that the possibilities are endless. So long and take care. If you're interested in learning all kinds of interesting ways to handle feather border designs, you may want to check out the 4th volume of our Free Motion Fun with Feathers DVD series. It is loaded with beautiful border and feather frame designs. And while you're at it, you may want to look over all 9 of our free motion quilting DVDs, with designs ranging from background fill designs to feather designs to vine and leaf motifs. Our DVDs literally bring the world of free motion quilting to your fingertips.